Welcome to today's webinar, Working with Multiple Sclerosis. Our presenter tonight is Maria Nguyen, and your facilitators are myself, Nicola Graham, and Jacqueline Efthimiou. We like to start all of our programs with an acknowledgement, so we acknowledge and pay respect to the traditional custodians past and present on whose lands we meet today. We acknowledge the deep feelings of attachment and relationship of Aboriginal people to country and respect the cultural authority of the elders in each community. So our presenter today is Maria Nguyen, and Maria's been working as an occupational therapist in the Employment Support Service based in Sydney. She's been with MSL for 18 months, and previously she was working in aged care.
Thank you so much for that introduction, Nicola. And thanks everyone for having me tonight. So in tonight's presentation on working with MS, I'll be going through the following. So managing your symptoms at work, ergonomic workstation setup, disclosure and understanding your rights, entitlements and benefits, working during COVID-19, and where to seek advice. So as Nicola said, I'm happy to answer any questions. If you have any, type them into the box and we can go through that there. I'm just going to stop sharing my webcam now before I go on to the next slide. Looking at MS in the workforce, so when we have a look at the statistics, most people are diagnosed with MS in the most productive years, so between the ages of 20 to 40, where you might just be gathering momentum in your career, or your career might already be established. So the important thing to remember is that maintaining the capacity to work relies on having the right supports in place and effective symptom management. In terms of symptoms, a longitudinal study show that out of 13 common MS symptoms, fatigue and cognitive symptoms and pain and sensory symptoms seem to have the biggest impact on people's ability to work. So in light of that, have a think about some of the symptoms that you're currently experiencing and how they're affecting you at work. We've come to our first poll of the night, Nicola, and the question that I have there is, which symptom causes the biggest barrier for you at work?
That's great. So I'm just launching that poll, and your options are, and this is not quite the same as your slide, Maria, because we couldn't get all the options on, but the first one is fatigue. I'm unable to manage full-time hours, or cognition. I can't keep on track with tasks and I forget easily. Physical, I can't move around the environment safely. Heat sensitivity, difficulty commuting or working outdoors, or other, and you can pop your other in the question pane in the control panel, and other might be sensory issues or pain issues, for example. So I can see that most people have voted, which is fantastic. It's anonymous. We can't see who's popping in what answers, but it's really interesting to see the trend that's happening. So I will just give you a couple more moments. Just about everybody has voted. 94% of people have voted, so that's fantastic, guys. After a day at work for most of you, I imagine it's great that at this time you're still firing on all cylinders. So I'm going to close that poll, and I'm going to share the results with you. So we've got fatigue at 73%, so most people. Cognition at 40%, physical 13%, heat sensitivity at 20%, and then I'll just see if anybody's put anything in the question area. I can't see anything there, so just a couple of people have ticked that. So yeah, probably no surprises there, Maria.
No, and thank you everyone for your responses. Yeah, look, when it comes to the top two there, so fatigue and cognitive symptoms, fatigue actually affects about 80% of people with MS, and generally on a daily basis. So the onset can be quite random or triggered by other things like heat, stress, and physical exertion. Looking at cognitive symptoms, it affects about 50% of people. People describe it as having feeling that their brain or their mind feels a bit foggy, that causes difficulties with thinking clearly, concentrating, and difficulties with word finding sometimes. So thinking about these symptoms, let's look at some of the practical strategies that we can use to manage them. So with this slide here, so first off the bat, looking at fatigue, it's a really good idea to review what is causing the fatigue. So everything that we do in the day uses up so much energy. So have a look at your daily routine in and out of the workplace and have a think about ways that you can do things in a much more energy efficient, energy conserving and simple way. So in terms of tackling your work tasks, that could involve writing shorter emails, calling instead of emailing, asking for help. If you're in a position where you can delegate tasks, definitely do that. Try to break up your workday into chunks and designate specific time to get something done uninterrupted. Or try to get into work earlier, as early as possible. Some people find that the morning period's quite quiet, so they can get a lot done there. Instead of typing, you could think about using the dictate function. So on your phones, there's a little microphone symbol there. And if you use Word or Outlook, there should be a microphone symbol at the top there where you can convert speech into text to prevent you from having to type. If you work in a more active role, consider balancing those heavier tasks with regular breaks. If you work in an office-based role, take a break every hour for about 5 to 10 minutes. It's really, really important that you take your breaks because it's really easy just to get caught up with what you're doing and sit through your lunch break. So if you have to, set a timer, put a reminder in your calendar and make sure that you actually take that break before you become too tired, and try to step away from your desk and have lunch away from there as well. Consider ways that you can modify your work environment to make it less tiring. So putting frequently used items within close reach, or using lighter weight equipment, such as if you're writing, try to use a lighter pen if you can. So have a think about your work structures and have a chat to your employer about potential for flexibility so that you can do your job. So this can be in terms of hours, such as starting earlier and finishing earlier to avoid traffic. If you work part-time, consider allocating the middle of the week to have the day off to break up the week. Some people prefer to work on consecutive days or take the Monday and Friday off. So it really depends on your schedule and what works best for you. Looking at cognition, I think planning and prioritizing are really important. So try to start your day off by writing a to-do list and don't overcrowd it. Put about 4 items on your to-do list and stick to it. Tick things off as you go before you add a new task. So that you don't have to rely on your memory, think about using a diary or post-it notes. And if something pops into your mind, write it down or follow it up immediately. As part of your planning process for your day, think about doing tasks that need more cognitive effort at a time of day when you might feel less fatigued. For some people, this could be the morning, and for others, this could be the afternoon. And try to do things one thing at a time, because multitasking can often pull you in so many different directions. So if you have that one thing to do, it's only one thing to focus on and manage. If you aren't feeling productive, or you've reached a roadblock where you don't know what tasks to work on or how to proceed with something that you're doing, go and take a break, find a quiet space to relax and recuperate, have a drink of water, talk to a colleague if that helps. Just be sure to give yourself some extra time if you're going to be tackling a demanding task. Looking at mobility, use of the elevator or escalators instead of stairs could be helpful. Think about using trolleys or wheeled backpack to avoid having to carry items in your arms. Think about doing all of your printing or your scanning or copying at the same time so that you don't need to make trips back and forth. Think about asking if you could ask for a designated parking space, or applying for the disability parking permit or the mobility allowance. Both of these 2 things I'll get to a bit later. Outside of work, maybe review options for working with a physiotherapist or an exercise physiologist. With visual disturbance, so there's some equipment that you can use. It could be a larger screen, one that features some eye care technology such as low blue light or is flicker free. You could also look at different keyboard options that have backlighting, especially if you work in a dim environment and find it hard to see the keys. I know one of my clients uses a magnifying glass with a light to help with reading. And as I mentioned before, consider using the dictation software if you have any difficulties with seeing letters for the keyboard. Looking at bladder and bowel changes, know the closest bathroom. If you're not going to be working at your usual work site, ask other staff where the bathroom is located. So consider wearing darker clothing or packing an emergency change of clothes if you have to. Talk to your GP, your continence nurse, a urologist, and a continence physiotherapist if you need further advice and assistance. Looking at heat, so heat is a tricky one. If you work outdoors, try to get the most done during the cooler parts of the day. If you're parking, try to park under cover if you can. Keep hydrated during the day by sipping on cold water or eating ice cubes. You could make use of a desk fan or using cooling garments such as a cooling vest or a necktie. Wear it before it gets hot. One of my clients works at a school and her colleague gets in before her. So she'll have a chat to her colleague and ask the colleague if she can turn on the aircon before she gets in. So by the time my client gets in, the room is nice and airconned. Thinking about mood and depression, now it's really important that this is addressed because it can actually have a really big impact on fatigue and motivation. So think about having a chat to your GP or your specialist about what's been going on. Describe your symptoms, and from there, they can help figure out options to help you. So with the next slide here, so these are just some top tips for managing fatigue that I've already gone through, but just as a recap there, review your routine, simplify your tasks where you can, and make sure that you schedule in short and regular breaks as well. Yeah, overall, I think the takeaway message with managing fatigue is that, or managing anything for that matter, is that small changes can make a difference. The same thing for cognitive issues, some top tips. So planning, prioritizing, making use of ways to remind yourself, the post-it notes, the diaries, your calendar. Do a higher cognitive demanding tasks when you're least fatigued. Do one task at a time. Always give yourself some extra time to complete the demanding tasks, and don't be afraid to ask your colleagues for help. So, asking them to email reminders to you so that you can log this in your calendar, or asking them if they can give you little pieces of information at a time so that you can write them down or act on them at your own pace. So definitely go easy on yourself when you forget things. So looking at job requirements, everyone with MS experiences different symptoms. So the symptoms you experience will have a lesser or a greater impact on the job you do, depending on the type of work you do. So managing your symptom effectively can help you to continue performing inherent requirements of your job, which are essentially the core duties that you need to be doing. When we look at determining core requirements as opposed to the way the job has always been done, it's not as straightforward. Some employers might be more willing to try a new approach, particularly if it means keeping a valued employee. But to make this happen, it's important that you and your employer are able to approach it with openness and flexibility. But of course, not all workplaces are supportive or willing to do that. So a bit later, I'll talk about where you can get some assistance with this. Looking at staying at work, so what if you're in a situation where you've attempted to manage your symptoms, but you're still struggling? So there was a comment tonight from one of our listeners who mentioned that they've reduced their hours and they're thinking of cutting back on more, or they need to cut back on more, and they're wanting to know where they can seek advice. So this is really important. I would strongly encourage seeking advice from a superannuation specialist or a lawyer in this instance, where you can't work, have reduced, or you're thinking of reducing your hours or thinking of stopping work altogether. This is so that they can help with assessing your individual circumstances and help you make an informed choice that ensures that you still can access the benefits that you're entitled to. I'll talk a bit more about income protection and disability insurance benefits a little bit later, but in this webinar, there was a handout to a list of contacts who you can communicate with to get free advice about super and your insurance. On this slide, there is a link to Beryl and Watson, but there are some others who we have a good relationship with here at MSL. So they include Maurice and Blackburn and Slater and Gordon. So the contact details have been included in the contact sheet as well. I would say the takeaway message from this is that unless your symptoms are totally preventing you from doing your job, seek advice before you make any permanent changes. So this section here applies more to those who may work in a traditional office setting, but keep in mind, even if you don't work in an office setting, there are ways that you can adapt your working positions and duties to improve your overall posture and the way that you use your body in your role. So the image here is a classic example of what not to do because it can lead to increased risk of injury and likely increased fatigue levels throughout the day. So when we think about an ergonomic workstation setup, we need to make sure that we have the best setup that we can to minimize strain on our muscles. We want the equipment to work for us and not the other way around. So as you can see here in the left-hand side, sitting bent over the laptop places actually a lot of strain on your neck and your upper back. So with this, it's really important that the monitor is raised up high, like in the picture on the right-hand side there. The feet are supported, elbows are level with the desk, and the eyes are looking comfortably ahead. If you're sitting down and you notice that you begin to slouch or lean on your armrest, you lean forward, or you rest your head on your hand, that's an indication that your body's tired and you should take a break. Now, ultimately, there might be elements of your workstation that you can't change, and you have to make do with it, especially if you're in a situation where you're working from home and you don't have access to the right equipment. So, for example, your desk might be too high or shallow, or you have a monitor that isn't height adjustable, or a chair that isn't adjustable, or has a very flat seat cushion due to years of use. So, ideally, what equipment you need to set yourself up well is a chair with an adjustable backrest, a monitor or a raised laptop, an external mouse and keyboard, a footrest if your feet are not flat on the floor, headsets for phone calls, but you can also be creative like my colleague was with this picture here using an esky. If you need to use household items, then do so, just so long as they're safe to use. Overall, I think it's important that you make a habit to take movement breaks if you're in a role where you're sitting a lot, or rest breaks if you're in a more active role throughout the day, to avoid the discomfort from accumulating to the extent that it becomes distracting and really hard for you to concentrate. Now looking at some other tips, or some summary tips basically. Number one, stick to a schedule and maintaining a routine and mentally distancing. Firstly, consider whether your schedule or routine can be simplified, which is what I mentioned earlier. Start and finish your work at the same time each day. So whether you are working from the office or the work site or from home, separate work time from personal time. So this will make it much easier for you to detach both emotionally and physically at the end of the day. Have a start work routine, such as going to get a cup of tea or coffee, or going for a short walk before you sit down at your desk. At the end of the day, you might want to set up a wrap-up routine where you use that last hour to check your emails, flag the tasks that you need to get done tomorrow. So the whole point is stick to your daily rituals, the rituals that get you in the zone for work, and then the rituals that signify the end of the day for your work. So the second is to give yourself some space. If you work from home and you don't have a dedicated office that you can shut the door on at the end of the working day, try to cordon off your workspace, even if this is just on the dining room table. Or if that isn't practical, try to minimize the space that your work area takes up. So physically close things down, pack it away, tidy up your space as the last thing you do before finishing work. If physically distancing isn't practical in your home, these rituals of mentally distancing are all the more important. So number three, don't let your usual practices go. Especially if you're working from home, it's important that you keep doing those things that you used to do. So making your bed in the morning, getting dressed, brush your hair and teeth, it makes you feel better and prepared for the day. So if you're engaged in video calls and video meetings, do wear something nicer or dressier. It's a physical and mental aid in maintaining your professional sense of self if you are away from the workplace. Looking at building boundaries, that's really, really important. So build boundaries so that you're not working excessive hours. It's so easy to keep going when you don't have a commute to do at the end of the day, or if you're working from home or have the freedom to leave your workspace later than usual. So make a point to turn off your work phone or your computer to stop yourself from checking emails or finishing that task that you didn't quite get to wrap up. The more time you actually spend working after hours, the less time you get to rest and recuperate. And for the next day, that could equate to less energy and can cause you even more stress or low mood. So it's important just to set those boundaries and stick by them. And 5, be sure to stay connected. So work hard to stay connected. Keep communicating with your team members, your manager, your clients, and your business associates. It's quite easy to shy away from that, especially if you're more of an introverted person. So go to have that virtual lunch if that's what's being held. Participate in those wellbeing programs if your work has them. Go for a coffee run with your colleague if you're in the office. Talk about something other than work with your work colleagues every now and then. So we've come to the topic of disclosure. So I know there was a comment from one of our listeners tonight, or many I saw, who mentioned that they're still at work and want to know about disclosure and how to approach this conversation. Now, I have to say, disclosure is a really, really personal decision, and there's no right time to disclose at the end of the day. So if we think about some of the pros of disclosing could provide you with that opportunity to discuss workplace changes that can help you perform your role. It could help to reduce the difficulties of covering up. So for example, think about the times when you had to go to a medical appointment. It might be easier to also help to ease misconceptions and concerns or questions that you feel your employer may have. On the flip side, looking at some of the cons, it could lead to people focusing more on your health rather than your abilities, or your colleagues might have negative views about inaccurate MS stereotypes. It could be that there are concerns that you could become unreliable or put more pressure on the team in the instance that you need to take some time off. So I think with this, ultimately, you don't have to disclose unless your symptoms are having an occupational health and safety risk to you or to others. If you aren't experiencing any work-related difficulties and you have no visible symptoms, you may want to consider delaying disclosure in the workplace. Now, whether you do and how you tell your employers is completely up to you. It might depend on the nature of your job, your relationship with your employer as well. You might choose to have an informal chat, or you might make it more formal, possibly with the inclusion of a support person, perhaps from HR, a union representative, another colleague that you trust, or a MS Employment Support Service consultant if you are involved. Before you have that meeting, write down some points and practice. You might even find it handy to take notes when you are in that meeting. After you get out of there, you could think about sending a follow-up email to whoever you spoke to in that meeting. So for example, hi Tom, thanks for your time today. I just wanted to recap some of the things that we discussed. So this way, you actually have a record of when you first told them about your MS, and it can be a reminder of some of the things that you discussed or actions that you agreed to do for both you and your manager. So in that situation. So for anyone who wanted to know about disclosure, I do hope that helps.
I'd just like to jump in here with a comment from Emily, who's had a very positive experience with her disclosure.
Sure. Yeah.
And Emily just wanted to say she's disclosed my condition to my manager. And since then, any time off or sick days I have, my employer is aware and is always saying to us, health comes first. So that's great to share. Thanks, Emily.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And that's the thing. You sometimes don't know how your employer might respond, but I think that's really positive that they're supportive in that regard. So that's awesome. Let's look at understanding your legal rights. So discrimination. So if you actually have MS, how do you know that you're being discriminated against? So there are several state and federal laws which aim to protect the rights of a person with a disability, which generally prohibits employers from dismissing or disadvantaging their employees because of their disability. There are two types of unlawful discrimination. So the first is direct disability discrimination, and that's where you receive less favorable treatment because of your disability. Whether that treatment is less favorable is determined by examining how a person without a disability is or would be treated in similar circumstances. If we look at indirect disability discrimination, this is where practices that might appear to be neutral or are meant to be fair have unequal and unfair effect on people with a disability. So I recall reading a comment from a listener tonight who mentioned that they're concerned that their employer is actually working towards terminating their employment. So with this, keep in mind that an employer can only terminate your employment if you can no longer perform the inherent requirements of your job, or you can only perform the inherent requirements of your job if your employer makes adjustments or accommodates you in a way that would cause unjustifiable hardship on them. So I'll explain what that is in a sec. When it comes to the law is very black and white, but the situations that actually happen in the workplace can be very far from that. And that can be really frustrating and upsetting because at the end of the day, you just want to get on with your work and your role. So if you feel that you are being discriminated against at work, but you feel like you're in a position where you can't approach your manager, your supervisor, or HR, you can contact external stakeholders such as Fair Work, contacting your union if you're a part of one. So you can also contact MS Connect, who may link you to one of us to provide you with support. So the takeaway from that is do seek support and guidance before you launch a formal complaint. Visit Fair Work, the Fair Work Commission site for more information. And I've just listed another link there that talks about the best practices for that and templates as well that you can be using. When it comes to privacy and confidentiality, all employees' rights to privacy are protected under the Privacy Act. So if you disclose, your employer is required to keep all of that information about your MS confidential. So in order to share it with share your information about your disability with others in the organisation, they have to get your written consent. So that's really important to remember. What are you entitled to? So looking at reasonable adjustments under the Disability Discrimination Act, employers are actually required to put in place actions to help ensure equal opportunity for people who have a disability. So this is commonly referred to as reasonable adjustments or work-related adjustments. The legislation actually doesn't specify the types of adjustments required. So each case really needs to be considered in its own circumstances, as it depends on the size, the capability, and the finances of your workplace. So some examples of reasonable adjustments could include renegotiating hours, relocating or modifying your workstation, being permitted to take time off work for medical appointments or treatment, or in some circumstances, altering your job duties, and then of course, working from home if possible. So employers aren't required to make any adjustments if they can prove that an adjustment would be too expensive, difficult, or time consuming, or it would cause them hardship. So that's what we would refer to as an unjustifiable hardship, as I mentioned before. Looking at your leave, so flare-ups and exacerbations of symptoms can be quite unpredictable, but knowing how much sick leave, annual leave, and long service leave you have can actually help you to plan. So make sure that you're using your sick leave when you're unwell. If you're in doubt, you can always go and get a medical certificate from your GP. It could also be useful to ensure that you're aware of your organisation's policies regarding leave. So what does your award and what does your contract indicate? If you have no other leave left to take, you could explore other options such as taking purchase leave. Looking at super now, so there are two types of disability insurance offered through your super fund. So the first one is income protection. So this is a monthly benefit paid while you're unable to work. It's also known as salary continuance and starts after a waiting period, and most can continue up to 2 or 5 years or to the age of 67, depending on your super fund. So under some policies, the payments may stop if your employment relationship ceases or if you are paid, say, a compensation or a lump sum. So as I mentioned earlier today, reducing hours and changing your work conditions might impact on your claim. So it's really important to seek advice as early as you can. The second disability insurance benefit that you could claim is total and permanent disability. So this refers to lump sums paid to you if you can't ever go back to your normal job or find any other suitable work because of your injuries or your illnesses. So you don't have to be unfit for all work, only suitable work given your education, training, and experience for the long term. Now, be aware of the fact that some funds have a stricter definition of TPD, so it's really important that you find out, as otherwise you might end up paying for insurance that you'll never be able to use. And unions. So all employees and independent contractors are free to choose to join a union or not to join a union. So it's illegal for a person to pressure another person about their choice. So for example, an employer can't pressure their employee, a business can't pressure an independent contractor working with them. It's also illegal to take or threaten to take adverse action against a person for being or not being a union member or taking part or not taking part in industrial activities. So the end of that is essentially every worker, including if you're a casual worker, has the right to join a union, and your membership is between you and your union only. You are under no obligation to disclose this to anyone, including your employer. Now, looking at other work-related assistance that you can access, there is job access. So job access is essentially an information and advice service by the government, funded by the government, and it consists of the Employee Assistance Fund, or EAF for short. So EAF gives financial help to eligible people with a disability, mental health conditions, and employers to buy work-related modifications, equipment, Auslan services, and workplace assistance and support services. So it's available to eligible people with a disability who are about to start a job, are self-employed, or who are currently working. A free workplace assessment is also available through the EAF to help work out what modifications or equipment will best meet your needs and help you to do your job. So at the MS Employment Support Services team, we work with clients to submit applications on their behalf all of the time. Especially for me, I think this week I submitted a lot of applications for cooling garments in preparation for summer. So if you're not part of the service at the moment, you can contact MS Connect so that you can jump on board. But you could also ask a friend, a relative, or an advocate to help you with your application, or work with your employer to submit an application. The Employee Assistance Program, so looking at this, it's confidential counselling service offered by some employers to some of their employees to support their well-being in the workplace and in their personal lives. So depending on the employer's arrangement, EAP may also extend to immediate family members, so you can speak to HR to find out if they have this program. Okay, so having a look at some of the other personal entitlements and benefits that you can access, you might be entitled to some income support from Centrelink, depending on your individual circumstances and your financial position. So some allowances and payments might include the mobility allowance. So this is for people with disability, illness, or injury who can't use public transport without substantial assistance and participate in approved activities. And these approved activities will refer to the need to travel to and from work, do paid or voluntary work, and participate in study or training. It's not means tested. Previously, the government actually announced that it would close the mobility allowance to new applicants from the 1st of July 2020, in line with the implementation of the National Disability Insurance Scheme, but this is actually no longer the case. It still remains open to applicants. Once you actually become a recipient of the NDIS, the mobility allowance is cancelled. So under the NDIS, you can request for transport allowance to be included in your plan, and that's no longer linked to Centrelink. Transport allowance is under NDIS itself. Looking at Disability Support Pension, or the DSP, this is a payment from Centrelink for people who have a permanent medical condition that stops them from working. So that is, they're unable to work for about 15 hours or more per week, and they're unable to be retrained for such work in the next 2 years. So having a disability or a medical condition is not enough to qualify for the DSP. A person actually has to prove that their medical condition stops them from working. The whole assessment process to get the DSP is quite rigorous, and the circumstances for applying for the DSP can vary a great deal. So it will be appropriate to obtain some advice specific to your own circumstances and get assistance with applying for this. The essential medical equipment payment. So this is a yearly payment of up to about $163 to help with energy costs to run medical equipment or medically required heating or cooling. The carer allowance, this is a supplementary payment for carers who provide additional daily care and attention for someone with a disability or a medical condition. There's an income test on this one, but there's no assets test. So having a look at some of the government payments. So as I mentioned, NDIS. So some of you who are listening today might already have an NDIS plan. Some of you may not. In a nutshell, what it is it's an individualized funding package to support people who are eligible. So supports may be funded in areas like education, employment, social participation, independence, living arrangements, and health and well-being. It's not means tested. So if you're thinking of applying for this, contact MS Connect, who will be able to provide you with more information and also link you to our MS NDIS engagement team, who can give you more information and guide you through the whole process of applying for this. The GP mental health treatment plan. So this is a Medicare rebate that can be arranged if you talk to your doctor. It contributes or covers the cost of selected mental health services. So this can be up to about 6 treatments initially, and then for a maximum of 10 per calendar year with a further referral. So definitely talk to your GP for this. The other thing that you can talk to your GP about is getting the GP chronic disease management plan. So like the mental health treatment plan, it's where a Medicare rebate can be arranged to contribute to the cost of 5 allied health sessions per calendar year. So if you have a chat to your GP, they can help put this in place for you. The other thing is the medical cooling concession. So this provides a discount on summer electricity costs for healthcare card holders, where a member of the family has a medical condition that affects the body's ability to regulate temperature. So refer to your relevant state or government's website for how to apply. On the handout, I've provided a link for each state, so you can refer to that for information about how to go about applying. The Australian Disability Parking Scheme. So this includes the Australian Disability Parking Permit, which is recognised nationally. It basically establishes a nationally consistent eligibility criteria and a national minimum for parking concessions to help reduce the barriers for permit holders, especially also if you're travelling interstate. Now, permit holders can park in parking spaces showing that international symbol of access, and can also receive concessions in most public parking spaces. So wherever you see a sign or meter that shows specific time limits. So with this, all inquiries about permit applications, cost, eligibility, and use should be directed to the relevant state or territory authority. Looking at taxi subsidy programs, so each state and territory has a slightly different version of the same program, but generally it's a reduction in the overall taxi price if you use taxis. Looking at car tax concessions, so you might be able to claim tax concessions when buying or leasing a car or when purchasing car parts. So car tax concessions apply only to cars and not vehicles like trucks or vans. So you can use the checklist available on the ATO website to work out if you are eligible and the extent to which the tax concessions apply to you. Looking at GST-free cars. So you can buy a car that's GST-free if you're an eligible person with a disability who is gainfully employed, or you intend to use the car for your personal transportation for 2 years or to travel 40 kilometres from the date that you buy it. So again, have a look at the ATO website for more information. Just a quick mention that with some of these entitlements, you need to have a Centrelink healthcare card. So that's a concession card to get cheaper medicines and some discounts, but you can only get it if you get a specific payment from Centrelink. So the Services Australia's website is the best place to refer to, because it'll tell you which payments allows you to obtain the healthcare card. Now, on to working with COVID-19. Sorry, I should have put a slide there. Nicola, there's a second poll question here now that asks, what are your current work arrangements?
Great. Okay, so I've just launched that poll. What's your current work arrangements? So please select one from the following. I alternate between working at the work site and from home, or I only work from home, or no changes due to COVID. My role does not allow me to work from home, or other. And if you select other, then pop your answer into the question area. Thanks, guys. That's really good. I can see you all voting, which is terrific. And 80% of people have voted, Maria, so I'll just give people a few more
Awesome.
moments
Yep,
to
not a
make
problem.
their selection. That's great. Okay, just a few more people need to vote. Fantastic. Okay, so most people have voted, not everybody, but I'll just close and share those results here. So we've got 17% of people saying I alternate between working at the work site and from home. 25% only work from home, 50% no changes due to COVID. My role doesn't allow me to work from home. And then some people have Janelle's typed in that she's working on site at a school.
Right, okay. Yeah, so in terms of the changes that have happened, I think there's no doubt that COVID has really changed the workplace. So employers have had to put in measures previously deemed as not possible, such as working from home. And I think a specific example I would like to give is, like, for teachers, as an example, they've had to facilitate remote learning at the peak of when COVID was at its worst. I think just navigating the issues associated with access to technology and computer literacy for students and families. So major changes. Following public health orders, I think workplaces have had to introduce COVID-19 safety plans. So the workplace now looks quite different. And some employers continue to implement alternative work arrangements where this is possible. So having a look at where there have been changes, this slide lists some of the examples of what your employer can ask you to do during COVID-19. So they can ask you to reduce your hours on a temporary basis, work from home rather than going to the office, work additional hours if reasonable, and ask you to work your normal hours as well if that's reasonable. Work a mix of home hours and office hours, like some of our participants are currently doing. Now, looking at the working from home situation, employers need to follow the rules in the state and territory that say employees should be working from home or should be allowed to work from home if this is practical. In some circumstances, people may refuse to return to the workplace because of a reasonable concern about the health and safety. Now, I've had conversations with some of my clients who have felt or feel unsafe going back because of compromised immunity. I would suggest in this situation, if it applies to you, that it's important that you raise these immediately. Talk to your GP or specialist for advice. Consult Fair Work and engage the assistance of your union to help you understand your rights in relation to this and figure out how you might want to approach that discussion with your employer. During COVID, there were people who were stood down. With things slowly returning back to normal, businesses are lifting stand downs, or they have done for a while in some states. So when it comes to lifting stand downs, it's really best practice for the employer to talk to their employees about this in writing and to consult with them. So consultation when lifting a stand down may also be a requirement under a specific award agreement, employment contract and workplace policy. So they have to be keeping records about the return to work and records about things such as notifications to return to work or lifting a stand down, and a record of alternative working arrangements. And as I mentioned earlier in this presentation, for your own record keeping purposes, if you have a meeting to discuss your work arrangements, send whoever was conducting the meeting an email about what you had discussed to recap your understanding about what was agreed upon and discussed to make sure that you're just on the same page. So document anything that has that potential to go south. Looking at some of the other changes, so modify your work role within reason to enable you to continue working hours. So as you return to work, employers may need to make changes to your usual duties because the business is ultimately operating differently. So your employers should check whether there are any rules about doing this under any applicable award, agreement, employment contract before they make changes. And if you are in doubt, also do the same. So also check that. There could be work share arrangements as another change. And when it comes to leave, this might be suggested as an alternative arrangement if the risks for you as a person who is deemed vulnerable, so having a compromised immune system, can't be addressed after assessing and considering your individual circumstances. So that might be the case. They could ask you to go on leave. Now, looking at what if you lose your job during COVID, or look at some of the measures in place to that. So because of the pandemic, I think in the last 9 to 10 months, the government has implemented stimulus measures, including JobSeeker, JobKeeper, early super release, the coronavirus supplement, just to name a few things that we heard frequently about. So it's really important to note that changes are occurring all the time. So I can't give concrete information here, but just as a brief mention, with the JobKeeper payment, which is essentially a subsidy provided to businesses so that employees can be paid their wages and continue to retain their jobs, there are new rates and requirements for businesses to meet. When it comes to the job seeker payment, there are some upcoming changes. I've attached a link to the Services Australia webpage, and this is really handy because it provides a timeline of the impending changes. So as an example, one of the recent changes is that the announcements of mutual obligations, that they're now reinstated. So mutual obligations, these are tasks and activities that you agree to do while you get certain payments from Centrelink. So it might not be applicable to anyone listening, or it may be. So yeah, be sure to check that link if you want to know information about the changes. And I think another really handy place to have a look at is the Treasury website. So on that website, it lists all of the, I guess, economic responses that the government has made in light of COVID. So where can you seek advice? As I mentioned a couple of times, MS Connect is a good place to start. When it comes to talking to your manager or supervisor, consider bringing a support person if you feel that you need that extra help in that meeting. You could talk to your HR department if you want to know more about workplace policies, benefits, or your leave situation. Consider consulting your union or with your union representative. Look at the Fair Work Commission, Fair Work website, superannuation fund advisors, as I mentioned tonight, financial advisors as well, if you want specific information about finances, legal advice, so you can contact Legal Aid for free advice. There are some law firms out there that provide free legal services as a once-off only. You can also contact, again, MS Connect for more information about who you can talk to as well. Now, a bit about the MS Employment Support Services. So essentially, we're a free service and we're a specialist disability employment service available to people affected by MS. We're a team of occupational therapists and physiotherapists who work with clients in managing their symptoms and maintaining their capacity to work in all sorts of different fields. So as you can see in this slide, these are some things that we can assist with. So providing information, education and support to people, whether they are job seekers, they're currently employed. We can also provide information to employers as well. We can do assessments, make recommendations about equipment modifications and technology at work, provide advice on whole life issues impacting employment, provide tutor links and advocacy for other services, and also advice and support to liaise with managers and co-workers as well. So, and the final point there is that ESS is not an NDIS service, so you can definitely still receive support from ESS and be on the NDIS at the same time. So this is where we service, so Melbourne Metropolitan, Geelong, Surf Coast, Sydney, Gold Coast, Sunshine Coast, Brisbane, Hobart, Launceston and Perth. In order to get you registered onto the program, we do require some documents from you. So a confirmation of diagnosis, a letter, that could be a letter from your GP, a neurologist, a report, etc. Evidence of your current employment, so a copy of a month's worth of recent payslips or your work contract, confirmation of Australian citizenship, so that could be a birth certificate, a passport, permanent residency certificate, the Centrelink customer reference number. So if you've ever received family tax benefits or youth allowance, you may have one of these. Now, the program isn't means tested, so that's important to keep in mind. And finally, you have to be working a minimum of 8 hours per week above the minimum wage to be eligible to join the program. These are some of the contacts that you can have a look at. I'm just conscious of the time, so I'll skip over this, but I know that you have a copy of the handout, so do refer to this if you're thinking of coming on board with MSESS. So overall, I think the take-home message from tonight is that when it comes to your work situation, be sure to be proactive and plan ahead. Disclosure is personal and it's your choice to disclose. So keep in mind that if your symptoms aren't impacting your ability to perform the inherent requirements of your role, then you might want to delay disclosing. Make sure that you are well informed before you make any decisions that impact on your work. Seek advice before making any permanent changes, and also be aware of what allowances and entitlements that you are eligible for. So I think that just brings us to the end of our presentation, Nicola. Does anyone have any questions?
Thank you so much, Maria. Lots and lots of information there, and we do have this webinar recorded, so you can go back through the presentation and pick up any extra information you might have missed. I've got a question, Maria, from Janelle, and she's asking, is ESS available regionally? Sorry, I just missed that slide.
Yeah, so let me go back there to have a look. Yep, so it's just lists there that in rural Victoria it's available, but at this stage it's not available in rural areas. Is that correct, Jackie?
What I would suggest is if you're interested in coming onto the ESS program is to contact us through MS Connect and get a referral put through to our team. Every individual is different, so I am taking on some clients that are in Wollongong, some clients that are further down the south coast, some clients that are further north as well. So it really just depends on where you're located and whether or not we can set up a service for you. So definitely be in contact with us through MS Connect.
That's great. Thanks, Jackie, and thanks, Maria. We haven't got any more questions. Just advising you regarding MS Connect is the gateway to all of our services. So if you do want to access employment support services, then it's through our MS Connect number. There's a number of other good reasons why you might call MS Connect, and you can have the opportunity to speak to an MS nurse advisor, an MS expert, or a social worker as well. We also have peer support. So if you would like to speak to somebody in a similar situation to yourself, then please do contact peer support and they'll assist you there. We have a e-program, an online tool called Get Your Act Together, which helps you to get some useful advice regarding the symptoms that you might be experiencing. We are also, as Maria has mentioned, an NDIS provider, so we can provide a range of different supports and services via the NDIS program, and different supports in different areas, as this slide indicates. So again, want to thank you very much for your time tonight, and a big thank you to our presenter and also to Maria and also to Jackie for helping facilitate, and that all important MS Connect number there for you, 1800 042 138. And if you could complete a very, very brief survey after this webinar, that would be fantastic. So thank you, everybody. Hope you have a lovely evening, and thanks, Maria, for a wonderful presentation.